A Canadian is a Canadian.
As soon as you make citizenship for some Canadians conditional on good behavior, you devalue citizenship for everyone.
I have greater faith in Canadians and in our institutions than the fact that we might sort of shrug as our fundamental rights are casually brushed aside in the name of political expediency or a national emergency that actually wouldn't be one.
Our veterans served Canada with honor and valor right across this country and all around the world.
Right across this country.
They stepped up for us, and now it's time for us to do the same for them.
Reducing the contacts, reducing the gatherings are going to be most important. I don't say this to scare you. I say this because we need to be honest with ourselves about what we're facing.
A Canadian is a Canadian, and you devalue.
We need to hang in there together.
I did not
for a little while longer.
I'll explain.
A number more months.
In a second.
My job throughout this
that's
pandemic
a rifle. That's a rifle.
was to keep Canadians safe. There's uncertainty and anxiety, but pulling together and following public health guidelines will get us all through this. I am absolutely serene and confident that I made the right choice in agreeing with the invocation.
I'm sure he is. All right, people. So that is a clip from a channel called the Indie News Network. Not mine, but I got a text message from a trusted friend who said, Viva, first of all, you might like this video and you might like this channel. And I watched it and I said, I'll do one better than that. I'm going to start tonight's show with that clip and a link to the channel, Indie News Network. I don't know the individual behind the channel personally. I just know that the person who vouched for that person is someone who I unequivocally trust. And I said it would be my pleasure and my honor to put that channel on blast for anybody who's looking for Canadian content. And by the looks of it, I think I am ideologically and politically aligned with the few videos that I was able to watch on that channel. I was on Jimmy Dore Friday. What day is it today? It's Sunday. On Friday afternoon. And we had a glorious time. I think the British expression would be taking the piss out of somebody, but taking the piss out of somebody is almost like mean-spirited, unfair jokes. Jimmy Dore has finally taken Jimmy Dore has taken an interest and has given me a platform to inform his audience of the insanity that is going on in Canada, that if it doesn't remain in check and on everybody's, the forefront of everybody's consciousness, will not remain in Canada. I could rant about it like all day, every day, but all of you know this already. Everyone here watching knows of the tyrannical abuse of Justin Trudeau over the last 3 years in particular, but really over the last 8 years in general. The corruption, the scandals, the lack of ethics. Everybody here, all of you know this. And Jimmy covered it on Friday, invited me on, and boy, howdy did we have fun with this. And a lot of people in the chat, and even, out there, zoom out a little, Viva. Damn it, like this. I'll talk about the lighting in a second. I'm working things out here. A lot of people saying, it's funny, Jimmy and Viva are so ideologically different. Jimmy's a liberal, far left. Although I think even the far left now is calling Jimmy a far right. Like I said on Jimmy's channel, there's no left and right anymore. I genuinely don't believe it's blue-pilled and red-pilled. The blue-pilled being the idiots who still think the government is good, and the red-pilled being the informed who know that governments have never been good. They never will be good because there's a reason why governments attract psychopaths. And this is a demonstrable statistic. I think like the top 5 professions in which there is a statistical overrepresentation of psychopathy. The professions which are the most likely. Just for everybody who doesn't understand what just happened. The professions, and for everyone listening on podcast, I just pulled up a chat that said the autofocus is tracking your hands. You see, what I've been doing is wearing a shirt with words on it so that the autofocus tracks the shirt. The professions that attract the most psychopaths. It's not an accident, by the way. Law, medicine, and politics. And then there's a couple of other ones which are like variants of those three. And there's also a good damn reason why so many lawyers become politicians. And yes, I have worked for over a decade in the practice of law. The level of what you would call narcissistic psychopathy. Look, I won't say it's not the majority. It's not even like a significant minority, but it's just statistical overrepresentation. Psychopaths. And government are psychopaths. And Jimmy Dore and I think we see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. Even the ones that are like the litmus tests, like universal health care. We both agree. If the government would spend a fraction of what they spend to fund international conflict, military ventures, change of regimes in foreign countries, if they spent that on healthcare, we would have a solution. You would have the private-public solution. Public healthcare for those who can't afford private. But instead of sending in the U.S., what do you have, $100 billion to fund a proxy war in Ukraine? Hey, what are they spending on the military? Trillions. Instead of spending trillions on the military, just spend $1 trillion less and put that into healthcare for those who can't get, afford healthcare. Do that in Canada. We agree on a great many things. Jimmy, not a liberal. Well, Jimmy, I think, is realizing what happens now. Once you go red pill, you then become far right. There's no question about it. So, okay, that's the intro. We're going to talk about something else very quickly before we do this. Let's do the standard disclaimers, a little bit of housekeeping. No medical advice, no legal advice, no election fortification advice. But we will be talking Pfizer. We will be talking Carrie Lake, I think. We will be talking Michael Flynn suing the government for malicious prosecution. We're live now on YouTube, on Rumble, and on Locals. Because what happens now and what I've been doing during the week, yeah, look at this. I'm going to get to all of the chat in Locals at the end of the stream exclusively. What I do is, because of my exclusive agreement with Rumble, and I'm proud to do it, end on YouTube, carry on Rumble, and on Locals. And at some point, I think we might end on Rumble as well, and then have a little exclusive portion of the after show on live on Locals, because it now has RMTP or RTPM, whatever it is, PRMPT. It's got that capability, so it's fantastic. The functions. We're live on all three. If you want to support the channel through these things called Super Chats or Rumble Rants, know that YouTube takes 30% of all of that. Kevin Rutherford with a $4.99 Rumble Super Chat says, "Who built the cages, David? Who built the cages?" I can tell you who did. Obama. YouTube takes 30%. If you don't like that, Rumble Rants, where I can now go here because of an app and plug and see there are no Rumble Rants to read just yet. Rumble takes 20%. So better for the creator, better to support a platform that actually supports free speech. If you want to support both Robert and I and what we do, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You can just become a member. No obligation to pay. No expectation. You're part of a community. You get tons of free stuff that's available to everybody. And if you want to be a supporter, you get access to lots of exclusive stuff. $7 a month, $70 a year, or more if you want to. You're one of those people who likes to spend more than the base requirement. And there's a lot of them. It's actually very, very encouraging. Now, Kevin Rutherford, it is because psychopaths don't stand out as much in normal population of oddballs. Can you think of many normal politicians? Hello, I see my child through the window. I'm live. No, I can think of a few normal politicians, and they typically don't succeed the way the psychopaths and the mentally unhinged ones do. Winston Shittenhouse, I dress right, but I am not far right. Hold on. Oh yeah, bring it, boy. Get over here. Winston Shittenhouse in the house. You smell terrible. We need to have the groomer come. I've embarrassed him in front of everybody. This is Winston. Winston, meet Winston. Winston. He just burped. Did you guys hear that? You just burped on national interwebs. Okay, down you go. All right. One more thing. So housekeeping, I think we've done it. Link to Rumble's in there. I'll get the lighting, people. I think the lighting's actually pretty good now. The autofocus, I think I'm actually going to upgrade and go to like streaming with one of them DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. but we'll see. Neon light. I'm trying to work it in. This is artwork. Creationsbyziggy.com. Wait, wrong way. It's just freaking beautiful. And merch, you can always get merch. Vivafry.com for your merch dreams. Now, okay, so I get I became aware of this. Where is it? Here we go. This is it. Not now. All right, James O'Keefe. So I come across, get a link. Someone sends me a link to a fundraiser, and I'm immediately about to give to it. And I'm like, wait a minute. If this is set up by Project Veritas, me no so eager to actually give to this fundraiser. So I double checked. It's a bona fide James O'Keefe set it up fundraiser, Give, Send, Go, because nobody uses Go F Me anymore because Go F Me should, go bankrupt. Give, Send, Go for the Pfizer whistleblower. I'm going to see if I can find the video of James at CPAC. Here it is. This is it right here.
The company I founded.
Let's watch this. We're going to watch this as part of the intro. I gave a $500 donation, not anonymously, because I genuinely believe none of these things remain anonymous anyhow. So if anyone thinks they're going to dox me for having supported, donated to the federally incorporated not-for-profit Freedom Convoy, Project Veritas, which I will not be donating to anymore because of what they did to James O'Keefe, I donated to this. Courage is contagious. And sometimes it needs financial support because, for reasons we all know. But check this out. This is by what James says, the woman behind the whistleblower behind the Pfizer story.
But I've learned a lot of things over the last month, having been ousted from the company I founded 13 years ago, mere days after the story. And as this was happening, I was talking to one of these people, and she was a little reluctant to go public, rightfully so. She was scared. It didn't feel right. But after what I went through, we reconnected. The individual who helped identify this man, who helped bring this to light, who was targeted, who was brought into a room, interrogated, who had a red van go to her home, harass her and her loved ones, who was scared for her life, was so inspired by the series of events that have occurred over the last 3 weeks that she's decided to go public with me on this stage right now. Debbie from Pfizer, would you please come out here?
I was worried that I would end up in a body bag or in a car accident. But I realized that the spirit of fear is not from the Lord. As a believer, I knew that I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't just sit there and watch people get lied to. People get gaslit. It made me angry. I think we all need to learn to not be fearful.
It's powerful. I mean, it's powerful stuff. Setting aside the dramatic music in the background, it's amazing stuff. So there's a Give, Send, Go campaign for her. Did I share the link? It's the pinned comment on my Twitter feed for anybody who's not there. What's with the background music? There's an old saying in editing: if you notice the music, it's too loud. But substance over form every day of the week. Never let the perfect get in the way of the good. Yeah. So if anybody, if you have something that you're able to contribute, there the link is there. And if you're not able to contribute, share the link. I mean, that's here. I'm just gonna go get the tweet right now. Oh yes, but give me the plug, please. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, here it is. Hold on, I'm going to share this right now. Barnes is LA time. So here, let me do this. Give, Send, Go, Pfizer. Boom, there it is. While we have the time, people, very rarely do I have what I consider to be not an original thought. I have plenty of original thoughts, but where I think maybe I've noticed something that people haven't noticed. Now I'm going to go back to the clip on Jimmy Dore just so that I'm going to whet everybody's appetite to go watch the entire thing. You all remember that clip a while ago with Klaus Schwab I don't know where exactly he was talking. I could find it out, but the original clip was posted like 9 months, 10 months ago, maybe a year ago. That he's talking about having penetrated cabinets. I've played it a dozen times on this channel, and when Jimmy played it last Friday to highlight the fact that the government has penetrated the cabinet of Canada, more than half of the cabinet, I heard something for the first time in it, which I think, if someone else noticed this, you let me know. But here's the clip.
Here's another one. You go, is it true that Klaus Schwab and the WEF have penetrated over half of the Canadian cabinet? Hashtag true WEF puppet. Hashtag Trudeau sold out Canada. Those are good hashtags.
No, they're not, Jimmy.
Another ratio, 9,500. So just so you know, Klaus Schwab's, he is a puppet of the WEF. He was their young global leaders.
Listen to this.
And do you want to see how I know this? Because here's Klaus Schwab.
And I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the world.
What?
Oh, just wait for it.
What we are very proud of now, the young generation.
By the way, this evil organization wants to take over the world. I have better audio in my living room studio than they do. You'll hear it.
Like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on.
President of
half
penetrated.
So again, this is the world order. It seems like the WEF and this kind of cabal of capitalists seem to be running every government.
Do you know what's interesting, Jimmy? You played it this time, and now I didn't pick up on it the first time, but I knew nothing of Brazil. He almost slipped up and said Brazil, and I don't know when this was, but it was definitely before Lula. So he might have been ahead of his prediction by claiming hold of Brazil with the election of Lula. But I know that Brazil or Argentina. Justin Trudeau. Listen to one more time.
President of Argentina,
and then just small coincidences. The president of Brazil on the WEF website implementing compelled vaccination in Brazil if people want to keep their government benefits. All right, Barnes is in the background. Let me see. I want to hear what Barnes says. Like maybe I picked up on something. Lulu was before Lula. Vladimir Putin. I'd say he makes it sound so delicious, like gravy and cheese. All right, we'll see what Robert says. Robert, bringing you in here. Boom shakalaka, sir. How goes the battle?
Good.
So we're going to see each other in less than a week?
Yeah. We won't have a show next week because we will be live in Las Vegas for the first Viva Barnes Law.locals.com meetup of folks. So that'll be fun with special guests Mark Grobert and Eric Hunley. We will record part of the show where we'll be talking about some of the sins of Sin City, some of the hush-hush stories from Las Vegas, including the Vegas shooter, and what some of the theories may be about that, which we'll make exclusive to members and as a content plus production for others that can be available for basically $10, something like that. And after the show, we'll be live in Vegas for members that have tickets next Sunday.
Robert, you heard the clip. That was Klaus Schwab saying how he penetrated the cabinet of Brazil, Argentina. This was before Lula. I guess it was after and before Lula because Lula was president before Bolsonaro beat him and then again afterwards. So I guess
Bolsonaro did beat him. He didn't run in that election.
Okay. So Bolsonaro arguably was or was not in the WEF, the young global elitist, but Lula clearly was. And am I hearing things or, going one step too far that he mentioned Brazil before Lula got reelected. And now that Lula got reelected, maybe now Brazil is part of the young global leaders.
We'll see. I mean, I think in terms of Lula's always just wanted to be a major player on the stage. So so far he's reversed positions of Brazil, at least partially on the Ukrainian conflict, came out with his vaccine mandates to get social benefits for families with children, things like that are different than some of what some of his supporters thought was going to happen. So we'll see how he actually governs. First time around, he governed as sort of a left of center, slightly populist, but not as populist as he campaigned on. And, so far he's been much more of an establishment politician since his election. There was, the Biden administration interfered in the case to try to produce him. The Brazilian court system released him from prison so that he could run, and then refused to hear any meaningful election challenge. And now they're apparently trying to round up Bolsonaro supporters and purge them out of the military using their own January 6th type event. So a lot of the critics of what was taking place in Brazil, Bolsonaro comes from the right populist side of the equation in Brazil, was a critic of the Ukrainian what didn't get Brazil engaged in that conflict whatsoever, and was a Trump ally. I think is currently in South Florida, planning his comeback in Brazil down the road too.
And for anybody who missed my interview with Paulo Figueiredo, who is the grandson of a Brazilian president in 79 to 84, call him Bolsonaro supporter. I don't think he's shy about it. So you might want to, if you want to write him off as partisan, you'll have your basis. But a fantastically interesting, insightful interview where he goes into the Lula corruption, Operation Car Wash, the insidious corruption that even Bolsonaro might have taken a little too far, and now there's a pushback to that. So it was a very, very interesting discussion on Rumble, on Locals.
And Paulo, what's his last name again?
Paulo Figueiredo, which means
okay. I wasn't gonna try to pronounce it. He's interviewed me before, and I've talked to him before, so I know him, but pronunciation is not my strong point.
Figueiredo, and it means fig orchard or from the fig plantation. So I have to. That's a little. All right, Robert. What do you want? Well, let's just mention what's on the menu for tonight before we jump right in.
And for those that are, some people would ask for like an order of discussion so they can know, where things are going. So we provided that on our Locals board. Here, the first case we'll discuss is General Flynn files suit for his wrongful prosecution. Then we have everything at SCOTUS, which includes foreign bank account reporting requirements and fines, what happens to abandoned property and disputes between states, the Biden student loan issue, and what may happen to a big elections case based on changes in the North Carolina Supreme Court. Up third will be Carrie Lake, takes her case to the Arizona Supreme Court. Dominion versus Fox. Then we have the big update that is the big case for today, which will be the Brooke Jackson case. Made the oral arguments this past week in federal court. Brooke Jackson versus Pfizer on behalf of the American people for the fraud that Pfizer committed. Then we have a brief update on the World Health Organization treaty that some people are still getting confused on. Some people asked about the UN agenda. The sometimes called the 2130 agenda, 2150 agenda, 21 agenda, depending on which label you use, and whether that's legally binding. A 15-minute cities and what's that all about. Then we'll discuss the Murdaugh verdict. Not too long about it, but just a brief snapshot. Jussie Smollett is claiming double jeopardy as a reason so that he can never serve his very short sentence. The George Allen Kelly case, that's the border rancher being charged with now second-degree homicide and aggravated assault in Arizona in a very controversial case because a lot of it looks like self-defense. A kidnapped victim who the family is suing OnStar. Department of Justice wants to deny Trump immunity for when he was president related to January 6th. Also related to January 6th, the major
those insightful words. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt the list. Sorry, Robert.
No problem. January 6th defamation case that is going to proceed against the Daily Dot. A case I'll be filing this week on behalf of Megan Fox, against the Wauwatosa School Board for its denial of free speech rights. The Florida blogger registration legislation that is being proposed. A major case about a major U.S. bank that went woke and how they're trying to destroy people and what it might mean for the future for the rest of us. The historic case of the week is about the interestingly named lawyer named Khan from Kentucky, on which there's been multiple documentaries about. The Tennessee trans law that went into force. The Oxford school shooting, one of the state court cases, dismissal on immunity grounds. Shock, shock. And the sort of rapid fire will have the California surfer fight, which is kind of a fun little case, unless you're on the other side of that. And then Jordan Peterson has raised the issue about deepfakes being libelous, and Michael Knowles appears to have been libeled by the Rolling Stone.
And then we'll see if we can work it tonight, Robert. Maybe we end on Rumble and have like a 15-20 minute after party on Locals where we get to some of the tips, questions, and chat on Locals where we are simultaneously streaming. Okay, so starting with Michael Flynn. And someone just said, hold on, let me see if I can bring this up here. It says, and to think, Dave Viva, you started by making, here we go, nice numbers, and to think you used to make vids in your car. First, I miss those days, but I don't think I can go back to them. But the Michael Flynn saga was one of the original sagas that I followed for, not from beginning to end, because I only got into it in the middle, but it was one of the sagas from my car. We had Jussie Smollett, we had Amy Cooper, Michael Flynn. The 30,000-foot overview for anybody who doesn't know, he was prosecuted for lying to the FBI in the context of it was Crossfire Hurricane, where they took him into a room and asked him questions about some of his communications with, I don't know, someone from Ukraine. I forget who it was. And he basically said to the FBI, look, what are you asking me this for? You have the transcript of the calls. All of his answers to the questions were equivocal in that I'm not sure, I can't quite recall, yada, yada, yada. FBI goes after him for having made false statements to the FBI. He pleads guilty. And I forget the name of the first judge, but he pleads guilty to a first judge who ultimately recused.
It's the same judge.
No, it was before Emery.
Well, there was a judge assigned to the case before the judge that presided it, but he pled before the judge that became the controversial judge.
I thought there was an issue about his first plea deal being arguably invalid because it was made in front of a judge who was conflicted.
It was that judge was ever assigned the case in the first place. Okay. He ultimately, but my recollection is he disqualified himself before the plea.
Okay. And it won't change much in any event, but then he gets in front of Judge Emery. It was Emery, right? Or Emmett
Sullivan, right?
Emmett Sullivan. Anyways, and we went through all of that. To say that judge was biased is an understatement of the millennia. Ultimately, he then moves to rescind his guilty plea. Oh, Jesus, so much that happened to it. Anyway, he gets pardoned. Now he's suing the government for $50 million for malicious prosecution because they knew that it was malicious prosecution. And even if he pled to making false statements, it was in the context of an investigation that should not have happened in the first place. Out of the $50 million, he lost tens of millions of dollars in potential business, basically had to sell. He, in fact, had to sell his home to assume his legal costs. Ruined his life, which some people suspect was the goal of it all along. Allowed everyone to discredit him. Whether or not it pushed him a little bit too far on the QAnon side of the election stuff, who knows? Irrelevant. Suing for $50 million. Robert, did I miss anything? And am I being too cynical now for thinking he's got a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding on this claim?
So the key component is he's bringing a malicious prosecution and abusive process claim, which is allowed under the Federal Tort Claims Act against the United States government for law enforcement officers only. And so if they have the power to either search, seize, or arrest, then they can be held liable for particular individual intentional torts. This all arrived originally, back at the time of the Constitution, you could sue a federal government official and they could raise lawful authority as their defense. Then the U.S. Supreme Court started coming in and granting sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity is a doctrine that is completely foreign to the Constitution, doesn't exist in the Constitution, is completely contrary to the Constitution. The very idea of sovereign immunity derives from that the king is the agent of God and as such can do no wrong. So that you couldn't sue the king because that would be like suing God. And by definition, he could not have done wrong. By definition, the American Constitution rejects and repudiates that principle of divine rule. And yet courts just decided to invent out of whole cloth. Many conservative justices proudly preach sovereign immunity to this day, showing that we don't really have any judge in America that's a true constitutionalist, in my view, because sovereign immunity has no business in our constitutional fabric. But once they started doing that in the early 20th century, it caused enough public uproar that Congress went in and changed the law to allow the U.S. government to be sued in certain instances. And those instances include certain claims that can arise under the Federal Tort Claims Act. That includes the right to sue a law enforcement official for abusive process or malicious prosecution. You have to administratively exhaust your remedies first, and then you can file suit. The malicious prosecution law depends on the jurisdiction where the prosecution was brought, typically. Now, Michael Flynn has brought this suit in the state of Florida in federal court because that's where he now resides. But most likely the substantive law under the choice of law principles will be the law of the District of Columbia governing malicious prosecution.
Does, do we presume that there's going to be a motion for change of venue, or if it's going to be the applicable laws of another state, would they not move it to that state?
Generally, no. Generally plaintiffs have a right to sue where they want to, and there is venue under the federal law for that to occur. They could argue for transfer of venue, but they generally don't argue for transfer of venue in these cases. But the choice of law principles don't depend on that law being the venue of where the case is being presided over. So in all likelihood, DC law will apply. It's sort of federal law adopting the state law of the jurisdiction at issue, even though it's a Florida federal judge who will be applying it. And under what the first requirement of malicious prosecution, abusive process is just kind of another form of malicious prosecution, which just means you've used the legal process in some way that was a lawful means but an unlawful purpose. The first requirement is you have to have a dismissal on the merits. And their argument is, and what was unique about Flynn is two things unique about Flynn. First, that he pled to it. And he later challenged the plea, but that's an unusual fact pattern for a malicious prosecution case. The second aspect is, while the government ultimately moved to dismiss the case on grounds there never was probable cause, the courts never approved it because what happened was, even though the government requested dismissal, Sullivan refused to do it. Went up to the D.C. Court of Appeals. It was kind of in place that the court should do so. It wasn't clear he was ever going to do so. So Trump ultimately pardoned him to prevent a scenario where Flynn could be, left hanging in the wind and Trump no longer president. That also is a unique fact pattern as well. So how that impacts, you won't find many cases that fit this fact pattern in a malicious prosecution context. What he has going for him is twofold. First, that the U.S. Justice Department did make a formal statement to a court that not only demanded dismissal of the charges, but said there never was probable cause for the charges in the first place.
And let me stop you there because I forgot one important fact is that he withdrew his initial plea because it was determined that the Department of Justice withheld exculpatory evidence from Flynn. And some people might say, well, why would he have pled guilty if he knew he was innocent? The process is the punishment, but that was a very material fact, is that the Department of Justice withheld exculpatory evidence from Flynn, and so he pleaded that as the basis to one of the bases for. I forgot that Emmett Sullivan refused to grant the dismissal, despite the fact that the government made the motion to dismiss itself, but they said it was all partisan and all partisan play, so he was right to inquire further into the reasonings behind the.
Yeah, it was really nuts. So usually the hard part of a malicious prosecution case is if a grand jury has indicted you, state or federal, courts generally say you can't bring a malicious prosecution case because that's almost to the point of non-reviewable finding of probable cause. And you have to not just show that you are innocent, you have to show there was no probable cause to bring a malicious prosecution claim. And that's a much lower standard than conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. However, what's unique here is that's precisely what the Justice Department said in their filing to Judge Sullivan. They said there was no probable cause here. And so that probably gets them over the hurdle. Normally, you have to show that the grand jury was defrauded in some way, that there was perjured testimony, falsified testimony, very high burden to meet the pleading stage, even the pleading stage of a case. But given what the government's official declaration, that gave him, once they made that statement, not only that we moved to dismiss, but there's no probable cause here, that gave him the basis to bring a malicious prosecution and abusive process claims under the law of the District of Columbia as applicable under the Federal Tort Claims Act. So I think the case should get past a motion to dismiss. Doesn't mean it will get past a motion to dismiss, but I think it should. I think he has the legal merits and the factual predicate to do so. Tracy Beans of, I think it's Uncover DC, you can find her on Twitter, was doing a long breakdown of his allegations. And it's also a very good, I think it's Jesse Binnell brought the case. And they do a very good job of detailing the whole history. And that the whole history was at every single stage, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice violated not only their own rules, but rules that were intended to assure that only people they had probable cause committed a crime had done so. They did so, and that basically it was an entrapment setup. It was a perjury trap at the interview stage. It was under false pretenses. They then misrepresented what took place at the interview by not recording their notes in a timely manner, by modifying their notes in ways that were contrary to the actual conversation, by not tape recording aspects of the conversation. Then the Justice Department withheld exculpatory information, not only from Flynn's defense, but also from the grand jury that issued the indictment. That would have been independent grounds to pursue malicious prosecution. Then they threatened Flynn by going after his family for illicit purpose, going after his son and threatening his son with prosecution. And so he has and that the whole background of this was the illegal spying on the Trump campaign, that it was part of what they called their backup plan, basically.
The insurance plan that insurance Stoke was talking about.
Exactly. The insurance plan to take out Trump in case he were to win. And so it presented, people want to know the whole Flynn story. The complaint does a good job of detailing that whole story. But I think he should have enough to get into discovery at a minimum. And there are some unique legal challenges he faces. It'll probably be the luck of the draw, but Florida federal courts are a little better than the District of Columbia federal courts, that's for sure. And then the 11th Circuit is probably a more friendly forum than the DC Circuit would be, given what he went through in that court, in that circuit. Maybe a fight over motion, over venue, we'll see. But it's a well-established federal claim based on the Justice Department's admissions and subsequent evidence that developed of bad faith conduct, which is what you need for malicious prosecution. You need not only you prosecuted someone without probable cause, there's been a determination that it's dismissed without probable cause, and you need malice. And he has lots and lots of evidence of malice.
Stupid question, maybe. Is this going to be a jury trial or judge? Okay.
Yeah, if it goes to, I mean,
so
if he gets past the motion to dismiss and summary judgment, yes.
Okay, so that's it. So the judge will adjudicate on those preliminary motions of law, and then if it ever gets anywhere past discovery, it'll be a trial by jury. There, I can imagine. Well, Rob, they'd want to then move venue to get to the District of Columbia if they can, to avoid a jury in Florida.
Problem they have is that the Florida federal judge would determine a move of venue. Generally, plaintiffs get to pick their own venue. There's a preference for that in the law. He lives and resides in Florida. That's where the injury and damage has been accrued. It's not like there's a lot of critical witnesses that are only available in the District of Columbia. So I don't see, there's a whole long list of grounds to transfer venue. Generally, federal courts don't transfer venue very often. So they may try, but that would speak volumes to their own recognition of bias in their favor in the District of Columbia.
And whenever you say grounds, I hear everyone in the chat going grounds in reference to the other trial. Okay, fascinating. And maybe I keep saying I'm going to do like a new vlog out of the car. They just take so much damn time. Robert, there's some Supreme Court cases, and I know if you send me something, it's got some broader meaning than what I'm able to fathom. Starting with the MoneyGram, it's the abandoned instruments of sort of financial instruments. I don't exactly fully know the context of how there was an abandoned financial instrument or similar financial instrument of a MoneyGram interstate. I guess somebody issued it, died, and they're trying to figure out who owns this abandoned property. The abandoned property being effectively a money order. If anybody doesn't know what MoneyGram is, it's like you're sending money from one person to another cross state. And so I guess the sender died, or it would have to be the recipient died. And
sometimes it didn't die. It's when the sender usually goes in, pays cash for an amount of money to be transferred to someone else that they can pick up anywhere there's a MoneyGram location, if they have the monetary control number and identification that matches the ID of the person, the recipient. However, sometimes the recipient never picks it up, and we don't know why. Maybe dead, maybe something else. The next step is for MoneyGram to return it to the sender. But sometimes they have no means to reach the sender, and they don't gather certain data about the sender, including legal residency in many cases. And so usually just some contact information. And so what happens is, in those instances, the money escheats to the state. The state always has these wonderful estate. That's why everybody should have an estate plan. That if you don't, the government often gets to grab your land and property and money, and they like it they like it that way. Now there's arguments that the Irish cheat laws should have never been that way. That's another point for another day. It goes back to principles where it goes back to divine rule, basically, that all property is really the king's property unless otherwise determined. That's where a lot of his cheat law originates. That's why I'm not a fan of it. But putting that aside, so what happened is the state where MoneyGram was incorporated, Delaware, was grabbing all the money. And this had gone through fights in many different contexts in the past, and the federal courts have applied a common law rule. There's not a lot of federal common law. It's mostly state common law, but there's a little bit. And where there'd been no specific legislation, they would allow a state like the state of incorporation of the company with the property for it to go there to that state. But Congress came in, didn't like that, changed the rules so that, in fact, it had to go to the state where the recipient made the original transaction. And Delaware wasn't honoring that because they were interpreting MoneyGrams to not be like checks and other written financial instruments that specific law applied to. So the U.S. Supreme Court was deciding who gets this abandoned property, was interpreting federal law, and in the process of interpreting federal law, determined that, in fact, this belongs to that a MoneyGram instrument is just like a written check for the purposes of the law. And consequently, it's the state of the recipient that gets it. So Delaware is no longer going to get to this windfall that they were getting before. It's a unique case also because it's an original complaint case. It's a reminder that federal courts, U.S. Supreme Court, is supposed to take these. These are disputes between states. A certain prominent case in 2020 was a dispute between states where they have original jurisdiction. Somehow in these cases, they have no problem asserting their proper original jurisdiction. Unlike that election case, they just couldn't find a way to take.
So no broader meaning than that, other than that, it's money orders are deemed to be the instruments, financial instruments of sorts. So the state to which they were being sent, where the recipient was.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I'm sorry. I think it's the state of the donor. Sorry.
Okay. Interesting, but I know the other Supreme Court, they haven't yet ruled on it, Robert. Before we even get into your pleadings of last week, the student loan debate, Robert. Now, okay, we were talking about it in our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community. I shared a link which the media fawning over the attorney representing the government, that they have the authority to do this. They're fawning over her as an individual and not over the legal arguments that she's raising, like powerful, compelling, she was poised and yada, 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 sort of glossing over the arguments. But the arguments that they're, and I'm just getting suspicious when the media focuses too much on the individual, but not on the arguments, flags go off. As far as I can tell, the steel manning of the argument as to how this is a legal forgiveness of debt is to abstract from the student loan aspect of this. It's not sort of just a way to, get a few cheap votes with students. They're relying on COVID as if to say the law that we're invoking to grant this forgiveness of debt, it's because of a catastrophe, a pandemic. Whereas had this been a hurricane, an earthquake, or whatever, and people who owed money had been incapable of repaying that money because of the crisis itself, well, there'd be no question. And therefore, this pandemic is the excuse for which we can now forgive, I don't know, however many hundreds of billions of dollars in student loan it is. Is that a very disingenuous argument that the Supreme Court, if they're so inclined, can sink their teeth into for public support and to please the masses, to say, yeah, we're going to forgive the student debt because it's not the forgiveness of the student's debt per se. It's because it was induced by this catastrophe known as COVID pandemic.
Very little chance the Supreme Court goes along with that theory. The only way they have a chance to prevail is if the Supreme Court decides no standing to sue. And I don't think they'll be able to make that determination. Justice Thomas highlighted that question early on to those challenging the rule, and they explained very clearly how they had standing, they would be negatively impacted. What you have is some state entities that collect interest on these loans that would no longer be able to collect interest on those loans. And so they would lose a lot of money. And so there's still, that was always the key, is who could sue. That was the tricky part, but they found someone who could in fact sue. And so under those circumstances, and Biden administration tried to opt out of everybody else, but I think that that should be sufficient for them to find standing. And if so, the Supreme Court will say this was not within the power of the president to claim COVID emergency authority to radically rewrite the rules of contracts across the country.
Well, I asked the question, even though the moratorium was another example where the Supreme Court sort of kind of seemingly went along with it. But if this is going to be true for student loans, why would the COVID argument not be true for all debt?
Oh, yeah, or anything else. And remember, ultimately, they did reverse that moratorium. They said the moratorium was an excess of authority. They initially said they were going to give them a little more time. Biden continued with the moratorium, so they came back in, and Kavanaugh flipped back and said, no, this was never constitutional. And so if the moratorium on evictions is not within the authority of the CDC, then forgiveness of all student loan debt is not within the authority of the president.
Okay. And nothing more on that. So when are we supposed to get a judgment on that? It won't be next week.
We won't know. It's usually several months.
Okay. The other one, FBAR, or as I like to say, that left someone FUBAR'd. This is a provision of law that requires a filing in the event that you have a foreign bank account or interest in a foreign company. And if you should even unwillingly or unwittingly fail to provide this form on your declaration for taxes that you own interest in a foreign corporation, foreign bank accounts, the government says we can fine you $10,000 for this unwitting failure to report. In the case at hand, it's an individual who, for whatever the reason, and I don't know if he was a suspicious individual, which allowed them to get this far up, it was either several hundred or several thousand accounts or interests. And the government fined him $10,000, not for the report for failing to report it, but per account. What did it come to? $27 million or $2.7 million?
I think it was $2.7 million.
2.7. So they fined him $2.7 million. So everybody do the math as to how many infractions that has to be at $10,000 a pop. And he says, no, it's $10,000 for failing to report one report per year and not per account. And they took him to the Supreme Court of Canada. They took him to the Supreme Court. And, lo and behold, the Supreme Court said, no, that's not in the spirit or essence of the law. And I guess reduced it to $10,000 after he spent however many millions on legal fees. Robert, what's the broader impact of this? And did I miss any details?
No, it's a massive, massive win for those fighting the IRS on FBAR issues. Because for those that don't, what is you have a lot of people who are dual citizens in particular, or Americans who go to work overseas. But this is a classic example. This is a guy who was born in Romania, escaped communist Romania, came to the United States. And then after communism fell in Romania, went back to Romania, worked in Romania, then years later came back to the United States, didn't even process this is not who, by the way, foreign bank account reporting was originally intended for.
What was it intended for originally?
It was intended for U.S. citizens that were using foreign bank accounts to evade taxes by hiding income offshore. That's who it was for, not for people who are doing business overseas or have dual citizenships or are living overseas. That wasn't the point or the purpose of it. Originally, that's not how it was sold, at least when Congress passed it. But it's been widely misused and abused by the IRS. They've been ridiculously aggressive by multiplying the number of accounts. If somebody finds out they're behind, they file an account. They try, and also often it can catch accounts you don't think it catches. So if you even have 10,000 in an account at any point during a year, then it catches you. Most people don't think of it that way. If it was just like a brief transaction in an account, it catches accounts you have a so-called signatory or other interest in. This can be accounts you don't even control or own, or accounts that you may be a signature card holder but are not for you. So it can catch a lot of innocent people and a lot of innocent conduct. And they threatening and extorting people basically by multiplying the fine was supposed to be per form. And they were saying, no, it's per account and per transaction and per year. And so they were multiplying it all over the place and extorting people into paying ridiculous sums of money. So it's very important the the U.S. Supreme Court come in and clarify this, clean this up, revoke the IRS's authority to keep misusing and abusing its power in the FBAR context. And so it was a great ruling on that side of the aisle.
Peter Rossi says assuming guilt. No, not in this case. In this case, the law says even unwittingly failing. It could be a bona fide, sincere accident.
Oh, completely. No willfulness required.
All right, now I forgot we've been on Rumble and YouTube for 50 minutes, people. We're going to get into the Carrie Lake Supremes right now, and we're going to do it exclusively on Rumble and Locals, and not because we can't talk about it on YouTube, because it'll be on YouTube tomorrow, just so that everybody watching this will now know. Go over to Rumble, and YouTube gets the leftovers. Not live tomorrow. So we're ending on YouTube. Here's the link one more time to Rumble. It's in the pinned comment, people. Go over there, see you there, and 3,348 people should be moving over to Rumble now. 3, 2, 1.